In the summer of 1940, as the Luftwaffe darkened British skies and the Nazi war machine tightened its grip on Europe, Winston Churchill authorized one of the most audacious commands in British history: set Europe ablaze. Few outside Whitehall understood what this order meant, but inside a small, unmarked office at 64 Baker Street, the answer took shape. The Special Operations Executive, known only as the SOE, began recruiting men and women willing to vanish into the shadows of the continent. Their missions demanded absolute secrecy, and for some, the price of service was permanent disappearance. Unlike conventional soldiers, SOE agents were expected to operate deep behind enemy lines, without uniforms, support, or recognition. They were trained in the dark arts of irregular warfare, sabotage, subversion, silent killing, and then inserted into occupied territories by night. The risks were uncompromising. Capture often meant execution under Hitler's Commando Order of 1942. But the stakes were higher still. Many of these operatives became their region's only link to London, gathering intelligence or forming resistance networks that could turn the tide of war in ways unseen by the public. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers, but within intelligence circles they carried a weight that belied their anonymity. By late 1941, the SOE had established Section F, focused entirely on France. German counterintelligence efforts grew more ruthless after the fall of Paris, creating an environment where agents needed not only courage but almost superhuman situational awareness. SOE instructors often warned recruits, "You will live on borrowed time the moment your boots touch French soil." For some operatives, that borrowed time ran out without leaving a trace. What survives now are fragments, coded messages, mission logs, and intercepted transmissions that raise more questions than answers. Though the British public later celebrated the heroics of certain SOE figures, the organization itself operated with a level of compartmentalization unmatched for its era. Recruits were instructed never to discuss their past or their comrades. The secrecy was so intense that even decades after the war, families of missing agents struggled to obtain basic information. Files were locked behind layers of classification, and some remain sealed under the Official Secrets Act to this day. The narrative of these agents, those who stepped forward and then vanished, remains one of WWII's most haunting legacies. Many of these disappearances occurred in France, where the Gestapo and Abwehr had established some of the most sophisticated counterintelligence networks in Europe. Radio detection vans roamed the streets of Paris and Lyon. Decoy-resistant cells lured operatives into traps. Informants, motivated by fear or reward, provided enemy officers with names, faces, and rendezvous points. Under such conditions, a missing agent might have been killed instantly, or might have been moved to a succession of interrogation centers and transit prisons, leaving only a faint paper trail behind. The distinction between those who died and those who simply disappeared remains blurred. It was during this period that British command began documenting black missions, operations so sensitive that agents were sent with minimal paperwork and no guarantee that London would ever acknowledge their role. This practice protected broader networks, but it also meant that the disappearance of an operative often created bureaucratic silence. Some files list only a date of deployment with the final notation, "No further contact." Others contain intercepted German messages indicating a possible arrest, though no matching record of execution or transfer has ever been found. One SOE instructor wrote in his notes, "These agents will go into the night and probably not come back. But if they succeed, Europe will remember." Yet Europe did not always remember. After the war, with entire cities destroyed and millions displaced, the stories of missing covert operatives became footnotes, mysterious, incomplete entries in intelligence archives. Only when historians gained limited access to declassified SOE records in the 1990s did a fuller picture begin to emerge, revealing patterns of disappearance that pointed to deeper wartime mysteries. What remains compelling is not only the courage of these individuals but the way their stories illuminate a hidden layer of World War II. Behind the well-known battles, El Alamein, Stalingrad, D-Day, ran a parallel war fought in coded messages, clandestine meetings, and silent acts of defiance. For every documented mission, there were others whispered about in after-action reports or recalled in aging testimonies. The agents who vanished became symbols of the war's unresolved questions, cases where even the most disciplined investigations could not provide closure. As the SOE expanded its reach into France, the Balkans, and the Low Countries, the number of unexplained disappearances grew. Some involved complex betrayals within resistance circles. Others hinted at German intelligence operations so effective they remained largely unpublicized. In many cases, London received a final transmission, "All well," before the line went silent forever. And so the stage is set. Before we examine individual operatives, we must understand the environment that consumed so many. A world where courage often outweighed survival, and where the boundary between life and legend blurred in the smoke of occupied Europe. The next part begins with one of the most famous and most mysterious figures to vanish, the wireless operator whose final days in Paris remain clouded by conflicting accounts and classified documents. In the autumn of 1943, as the German occupation of France tightened with relentless precision, a single clandestine radio signal pulsed through the ether above Paris. It came from a young British agent, Noor Inayat Khan, codename Madeline, the last operating wireless operator of the shattered Prosper network. Her transmissions were a lifeline to London, yet each one carried a deadly risk. German direction-finding units, the notorious Funkabwehr, prowled the city with radio vans capable of triangulating her position within minutes. For Noor, every transmission could have been her last. Her story begins months earlier at the SOE's training schools in Beaulieu. Unlike many recruits, Noor had no military background. She was a writer, a musician, a dreamer. But she was also fiercely committed to resisting tyranny. Under the gaze of her instructors, she learned the secrets of encryption, the pianist's touch needed for flawless Morse code, and the art of disappearing into the crowd. She struggled with weapons training but excelled, beyond expectation, at radio work. Her performance earned her a deployment to Paris at a critical moment. The Prosper network had collapsed after mass arrests. London needed someone who could operate alone, quietly, invisibly. Upon arriving in Paris in June 1943, Noor discovered a resistance world in chaos. Couriers were compromised, safe houses burned, and double agents infiltrated even trusted circles. After the fall of Prosper's leaders, Francis Suttil, Gilbert Norman, and André Borel, the Gestapo believed the network was finished. But they did not account for Madeline. Using rooftop antennas and constantly shifting her location, Noor kept the line open between France and London. She sent intelligence on German troop movements, airfield construction, and morale inside the occupation. One SOE officer later recalled, "Without her, Paris would have gone dark." The struggle Noor faced was not only tactical but deeply personal. She lived under relentless fear of betrayal, aware that even a friendly face might be an informant working for the Sicherheitsdienst. Her diary entries, later recovered from a safe house, hint at her internal conflict. One passage read, "I must be steady. I must be calm. I must not think of home." She was isolated, burdened with the knowledge that capture meant torture, yet she refused repeated orders from London to evacuate. She believed her duty was to remain until a replacement arrived. That replacement never came. By September 1943, the German hunt intensified. The Funkabwehr had narrowed their search to specific neighborhoods. Reports from the time describe agents sweeping through apartment blocks, listening for faint Morse code vibrations through walls or floors. Still Noor evaded them. What ultimately doomed her was not German technology, but betrayal. A French double agent, whose identity remains contested in classified archives, provided the Gestapo with detailed descriptions of Noor, her habits, and her likely safe houses. On the night of October 13, 1943, the Gestapo ambushed her at an apartment in Rue Erlanger. Her arrest raised immediate questions. Witnesses claim she fought desperately, scratching and biting her captors. In her first interrogation sessions at 84 Avenue Foch, the Gestapo's Paris headquarters, she refused to give any information, even after repeated beatings. German officers recorded her as dangerous and rebellious. They noted her repeated escape attempts, including one incident where she nearly slipped out through a skylight. Such behavior was unusual for a captured wireless operator. It suggested she still hoped to complete her mission. What followed is where the historical trail fractures. Some accounts, drawn from post-war testimonies, claim German intelligence used her confiscated codes to send deceptive messages to London, messages the SOE failed to detect as compromised. This possibility remains debated among historians. Others argue that the Germans could not fully exploit her equipment due to her encryption habits. The truth is buried within wartime telegrams, many of which remain partially redacted. In November 1943, Noor was transferred to Germany. She was classified as a Nacht und Nebel prisoner, night and fog, reserved for those who were to disappear without trace. She was incarcerated at Pforzheim prison under solitary confinement, shackled hand and foot. Guards later testified that she endured 10 months of isolation without betraying a single name. Despite these testimonies, the official German records of her captivity are incomplete. with gaps that fuel speculation about other interrogations or movements never documented. Her final days at Dachau remain among WWII's most disputed stories. While many historians agree she was executed on September 13, 1944, others point to inconsistencies in Nazi paperwork, time discrepancies, and the absence of direct witnesses. Some files suggest she arrived in a group, others claim she was transported alone. The exact chain of events leading to her death is obscured by conflicting testimonies and missing documents. Her last recorded word, reported by a guard but never independently verified, was "Liberté." Today, Nour Inayat Khan is remembered as a hero of the resistance. Yet her disappearance into the machinery of Nazi detention leaves lingering questions. What intelligence did she withhold? Did her capture compromise other networks? Why do certain SOE files on her missions remain classified even now? These unresolved details form the shadow that hangs over her legacy, and they lead us directly to the next operative whose wartime disappearance remains just as enigmatic but under vastly different circumstances. A naval diver who vanished beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. In the blue depths of the Mediterranean, where sunlight fades into shifting currents and wartime secrets sank beneath the waves, one British operative built his reputation on the razor edge between innovation and mortality. Captain Lionel Buster Crabbe, Royal Navy frogman, diving pioneer and reluctant spy, entered World War II as a merchant seaman but soon became one of Britain's leading underwater specialists. His missions involved hazards that few at the time fully understood: naval mines, limpet bombs, and the silent Italian frogmen who attacked Allied ships with unprecedented skill. Yet it was not the dangers of underwater warfare that cemented Crabbe's legacy, it was the mystery surrounding his disappearance on a covert Mediterranean operation. Crabbe's journey into clandestine diving began in 1941 when he joined the Royal Naval Patrol Service. The war had created an urgent need for men who could operate beneath enemy hulls, disarm mines, and inspect the damage from Italian human torpedoes. Stationed in Gibraltar, Crabbe was tasked with countering the Decima MAS, an elite Italian naval sabotage unit whose divers penetrated Allied harbors with explosive charges. The Italian missions were highly effective, damaging or sinking several ships. Crabbe, working with naval experts from HMS Vernon, developed countermeasures, including patrol patterns, underwater listening devices, and defensive nets. His struggle was not only technical but physically demanding. Early diving gear, heavy rubber suits, crude oxygen equipment, was unreliable. Divers faced hypoxia, nitrogen narcosis, and sudden equipment failures. Crabbe kept detailed notes after each dive, writing, "The sea reveals little, yet remembers everything." He experimented with new oxygen mixtures and rebreather systems, becoming one of the first British divers to master long-duration underwater operations. Admiralty engineers began referring to him as a natural gill man, though Crabbe himself dismissed the praise. He believed discipline, not talent, kept him alive. By 1942, Crabbe's work attracted the attention of naval intelligence. Gibraltar became a crucible for clandestine underwater warfare. British divers recovered Italian devices, reverse-engineered them, and trained counter-sabotage teams. Yet even as successes mounted, the intelligence gained raised more questions. Italian equipment showed evidence of recent modifications, suggesting enemy engineers were studying British defenses. Admiralty files from the time contained several entries marked only, "Possible leak within Port Authority." These notes hinted that enemy divers may have had assistance from informants or even Allied personnel. Crabbe's operations became entangled in this hidden conflict. One operation in 1943 drew Crabbe into the heart of the Mediterranean's most dangerous harbor. Sources differ on the exact location. Some point to La Spezia or Livorno, others to a classified anchorage used by the German Kriegsmarine. What is known is that Crabbe and a small dive team were dispatched to inspect a high-value target, either a captured Italian vessel or a suspected German supply ship. Their objective: determine whether new underwater sabotage technology was being tested beneath the hull. The mission logs, heavily redacted, refer to foreign devices of unknown design. Crabbe's preparations were meticulous. He reviewed charts, studied likely mooring patterns, and rehearsed dive routes. But the harbor itself, its patrol routines, mines, and underwater defenses, remained uncertain. Diaries from one of his team members described the operation as a blind descent into an enemy lung. The dive began before dawn. Water temperatures were near freezing. Visibility was poor. Crabbe descended first, signaling the others to follow once he reached the keel shadow. And then the trail fractures. The surface support crew reported no return signal. A second diver descended after several minutes but found only disturbed silt and a faint metallic echo he could not explain. There was no sign of crab, no equipment, no bubbles, no lifeline. German harbor officials later denied capturing any British divers on the date in question. Italian records from the period show no unusual activity. British after-action reports bluntly summarized the event. Crab failed to surface. Presumed lost. Yet inconsistencies began appearing almost immediately. A local fisherman later claimed he saw searchlights flicker across the water soon after dawn, lights that did not match routine harbor patrols. A declassified naval cable from Malta mentions unauthorized vessel movement in the same area. Some historians speculate that Crab was captured quietly for intelligence value. Others believe an equipment malfunction or enemy countermeasure claimed his life within minutes of descent. Without a body, no firm conclusion could be reached. Post-war analysis deepens the mystery. When the Admiralty reviewed wartime diving losses, Crab's file was marked with restrictions uncommon for standard operational casualties. Several pages remain classified due to Cold War implications, suggesting his World War II work may have intersected with sensitive intelligence methods. This opacity fuels the unresolved question. What exactly did Crab discover or attempt to discover beneath that ship? The disappearance of Lionel Crab stands at the crossroads of wartime innovation and espionage, a moment where the sea swallowed both truth and speculation. His loss left gaps in British naval intelligence and halted several experimental diving programs. But Crab's name became legend among post-war divers, referenced whenever missions demanded courage beyond protocol. As British operations expanded beyond the Mediterranean, another frontier of complexity awaited: the fractious, politically volatile Balkans. It was here, amid competing resistance groups and brutal German reprisals, that another British agent, Major William Deacon, would vanish temporarily under circumstances that remain as murky as any underwater mission. In the rugged mountains of the Balkans, where ridgelines cut the sky like broken blades and shifting loyalties determined survival, the British Special Operations Executive saw a rare opportunity. By 1943, Yugoslavia had become a battleground not only between partisans and Axis occupiers, but among rival resistance movements vying for power in the post-war future. Into this volatile landscape stepped Major William Deacon, an Oxford historian turned intelligence officer. He had been handpicked by Winston Churchill himself, with the PM noting in a private memo that Deacon possessed clarity of mind, courage, and discretion, qualities essential for our Balkan mission. What Churchill could not have predicted was how close Deacon would come to disappearing forever. Deacon's assignment began in April 1943, when he parachuted into Yugoslavia as part of Operation Typical, the first official British mission to Tito's partisans. His task was simple in description but treacherous in execution: evaluate the effectiveness of Yugoslav resistance, forge diplomatic ties with Tito, and report on which faction, the royalist Chetniks or the communist partisans, was truly fighting the Axis. The struggle for control of Yugoslavia had become a labyrinth of sabotage, shifting alliances, and brutal reprisals. British command needed clarity. They sent Deacon into a war zone where truth was often buried beneath propaganda and blood. The partisans operated in some of the harshest terrain of Europe. Their mountain bases were constantly threatened by German offensives, while supply shortages forced fighters to live on meager rations. The Luftwaffe targeted their strongholds relentlessly, particularly the highlands around Drvar and the river Neretva. Deacon, carrying only essential radio equipment and a small team, was forced to adapt quickly. He hiked long distances across goat paths under the cover of night, slept in forest bivouacs, and held encoded conversations with London in the brief windows when German radio detection units were less active. In dispatches, Deacon described the partisans with surprising admiration. Their resilience exceeds anything encountered in Europe, he reported. They possess no illusions, yet they fight with a clarity of purpose that defies their circumstances. His reports began shifting British policy. Churchill increasingly saw Tito as the most viable ally in the region. But this shift carried consequences. If Deacon's presence signaled British preference toward the partisans, both the Germans and the Chetniks would view him as a threat. The turning point came in May 1943, during the German-led Case Black Offensive. Tens of thousands of Axis troops, German, Croatian, Bulgarian, and Italian, surged into western Bosnia in an attempt to crush Tito's headquarters. Deacon was with Tito's staff when the Luftwaffe bombed their position. Eyewitness accounts describe how Deacon shielded a wounded partisan courier when a bomb detonated just meters away. The explosion hurled him downslope, leaving him badly injured. In the chaos, smoke and dust swallowed the hillside. For several hours, even the partisans believed Deacon had been killed. It would not be the last time he seemed to vanish. Partisan stretcher-bearers eventually found him unconscious. He had suffered deep lacerations, contusions, and possible internal injuries. Tito ordered his recovery a priority, perhaps recognizing that losing the British envoy, especially a Churchill confidant, would damage relations with London. Yet German forces were closing in. They overran swathes of Bosnian countryside, capturing villages and executing suspected collaborators. For Deacon, evacuation was impossible. The mountains became his refuge and his prison. This period in Deacon's story is marked by a strange absence. For nearly 2 weeks, no radio contact was made with Allied command. London received contradictory rumors from intercepted German communications. One report claimed an English officer had been killed near the Neretva River. Another mentioned a captured British liaison. The SOE, unable to verify either account, listed Deacon as status unknown. Classified wartime memos reveal that MI6 even explored contingency plans for extracting him, if he were still alive. When German paratroopers launched Operation Rosselsprung in May 1944, an assassination raid targeting Tito in Drvar, Deacon once again found himself in the center of a maelstrom. German Fallschirmjäger units descended on the town with ruthless precision. British staff officers scattered. Several were killed or captured. A partisan fighter later testified that Deacon disappeared amid the parachute drops, seen last limping into the forest with his escort. Hours passed, then days. London received no updates. For a second time, Deacon's fate hung in the balance. The truth emerged only after Drvar fell. Deacon had escaped into the hills and rejoined Tito during the retreat to the eastern mountains. Yet fragments of his disappearance remain unexplained. Some accounts suggest he temporarily separated from Tito's staff. Others imply that partisan units, suspicious of foreign observers during the chaos, may have withheld his location until certain of upcoming operations. The absence of precise records only deepens the ambiguity. Deacon eventually returned to Allied lines, but his brush with death, and the shroud that briefly enveloped his movements, left a lasting mystery. Why were some details of his disappearance redacted in post-war reports? Why do certain Yugoslav testimonies contradict one another? And what did Deacon learn during his time with Tito that later shaped British policy? The answers remain elusive. But Deacon's case marked a turning point. British involvement in the Balkans would only grow more complex. And as operations expanded northward into the Low Countries, another agent would vanish, this time without the reappearance that saved Deacon's fate. In the occupied Netherlands of late 1944, a land of flooded fields, shattered towns, and civilians starving through the brutal hunger winter, covert operations took on a desperate new intensity. Operation Market Garden had failed only weeks earlier, leaving large portions of the country under German control and resistance networks exposed. Into this volatile landscape stepped one of Britain's lesser-known but highly skilled agents, N. Irvine, an SOE operative assigned to support Jedburgh teams tasked with coordinating resistance activity, sabotaging German logistics, and preparing the ground for a renewed Allied advance. Irvine entered a world where every farmhouse might conceal a radio set or a traitor, and where even trusted networks had become riddled with uncertainty. Irvine's insertion began in September 1944, when he parachuted at night into the Veluwe region alongside members of a Jedburgh team operating under the codename Dudley. Their objective was clear: strengthen Dutch sabotage operations, guide airdrop deliveries, and re-establish communication with cells whose leadership had been decimated by recent German crackdowns. Radio signals from the Netherlands had become sporadic, and British command feared that many local resistance groups had either gone dark or been infiltrated by the Sicherheitsdienst. Irvine's arrival was meant to restore coherence, but from the moment he touched Dutch soil, he found himself moving through a labyrinth of shifting loyalties. The human struggle Irvine faced was immediate. The Dutch resistance was divided between the LO, Landelijke Organisatie, and KP Nachploegen, each with different methods and leadership structures. Some groups operated with discipline and secrecy. Others had been compromised through careless communication or betrayal under torture. Irvine's role required him to navigate these factions with precision. He traveled between safe houses, often cycling long distances under curfew, carrying coded messages and discreetly inspecting the security of local cells. His reports, sent in tight bursts to avoid radio detection, warned London that German counterintelligence had grown exceptionally aggressive, with patrols sweeping rural areas previously thought safe. One of Irvine's closest contacts, a Dutch courier named Martin, later described him as calm, observant, and cautious in a way we were not used to. Irvine insisted that all transmissions be relocated constantly, and he urged resistance leaders to abandon compromised safe houses, warnings that not all heeded. Indeed, the WWII's infiltration of Dutch networks had reached a peak through the notorious England Spiel, England Game, a deception operation in which captured agents were forced to send false messages to London. SOE had begun recognizing inconsistencies, but trust in the field remained fragile. Irvine operated under the assumption that any contact could be a double agent. On October 20, 1944, Irvine set out to meet a local commander near Apeldoorn who claimed to have intelligence on German troop withdrawals. The meeting was scheduled at a farmhouse used previously for covert gatherings. It was the last confirmed sighting of him. When he failed to return to his safe house, resistance members assumed he had been delayed by patrols. But by the next morning, German checkpoints had increased across the area, and rumors spread of a sudden sweep conducted by SD officers. A nearby resistance member reported hearing trucks pass shortly after midnight, unusual movement for that rural sector. The official German records from the region are ambiguous. One SD log mentions the capture of a suspected British operative near the Apeldoorn-Deventer corridor on the same night Irvine disappeared, but provides no name or subsequent record of transfer. Another log, discovered after the war, refers to an interrogation of an English-speaking saboteur, yet the description does not conclusively match Irvine. No known execution order, transport record, or prisoner intake form lists him. After-action reports from British command note only, Agent Irvine, no further contact. The sparse documentation suggests one of three possibilities: a covert arrest followed by execution without paperwork, a disappearance during a failed escape attempt, or a betrayal orchestrated by an infiltrated Dutch network. Modern historians examining the case point to a chilling detail. The safe house Irvine was heading toward had been compromised days earlier, though this information may not have reached him, another symptom of fractured communication. Post-war testimonies from Dutch resistance survivors include conflicting accounts. One claims Irvine was seen in a truck bound for Zwolle. Another insists he fled into the woods during a firefight. A third suggests an unknown collaborator may have sold information to the SD. The inconsistencies reflect the chaos of late-war Netherlands, when starvation, fear, and desperation blurred even the most honest recollections. There is, however, one particularly perplexing angle. In 1952, a partially declassified SOE memo reviewed Irvine's case and suggested unverified field intelligence, linking his disappearance with a network that had been covertly cooperating with Allied command despite appearing inactive. The memo raises the possibility, never confirmed, that Irvine may have been diverted into a separate shadow operation whose details remain sealed under long-term classification. If true, this would complicate the standard narrative of his disappearance, though no corroborating documents have surfaced. The disappearance of N. Irvine symbolizes the dangerous fragmentation of resistance efforts in occupied Europe during the war's final year. His loss deprived several Dutch cells of critical guidance precisely when they needed it most. And for SOE command, it became another unresolved file in a growing stack of wartime absences, agents who vanished without definitive trace, caught between German repression and the fog of Allied covert operations. As the war edged toward its conclusion, yet another British operative would meet a similar fate, this time in the chaotic collapse of Nazi control in Central Europe. Captain John Pilley's disappearance near the Austrian border marked one of the most confounding losses of the war's final months. In the final months of the Second World War, as the collapsing Third Reich retreated through the mountains and valleys of Central Europe, British intelligence officers faced a dangerous and unpredictable landscape. Front lines shifted daily. Refugee columns clogged the roads. Soviet, American, and British units converged on the same shrinking territory, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing. Into this volatile environment stepped MI6 operative Captain John Pilley, tasked with one of the war's most perilous duties: extracting compromised agents, couriers, and informants before they could be captured by either the remnants of the SS or advancing Soviet forces. His disappearance near the Austrian border remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases of Britain's late-war intelligence efforts. Pilley's mission took shape in February 1945 when reports from MI6 field offices indicated that several long-term Allied informants inside Austria risked exposure as Nazi control crumbled. Among them were railway clerks, civilian codebreakers, and anti-Nazi officers who had provided intelligence for years. Some had been marked for death by the SS. Others might have been detained or exploited by Soviet intelligence seeking strategic advantage in post-war Europe. The British saw an urgent need to extract these individuals, and Pili, a seasoned officer with experience in the Balkans and northern Italy, was chosen to lead the operation. The human struggle of this mission was immense. Pili had to navigate through an Austria on the edge of destruction. Hitler had declared the region part of the Alpenfestung, the Alpine fortress, supposedly the regime's final defensive stronghold. Although largely a propaganda illusion, the rumor forced Allied officers to prepare for ambushes, rogue SS units, and pockets of fanatic resistance. MI6 dispatches from March 1945 describe extreme tension along mountain passes and heightened suspicion among civilians. Pili carried forged papers, a compact radio, and a list of contacts written in cipher. He knew that a single checkpoint could end the mission and his life. After crossing into southern Austria via northern Italy, Pili linked up with a small network of resistance contacts near Klagenfurt. His initial reports to MI6 were brief but optimistic. Contacts intact. Movement possible. Situation unstable but manageable. His team began guiding individuals through forest trails into zones nearing Allied control. Witnesses from these early extractions recall Pili as composed, precise, and unshaken even when German patrols passed frighteningly close. He coordinated rendezvous points, verified identities, and avoided radio transmissions whenever possible to prevent detection by German direction-finding units still active in the region. The insight that sheds light on Pili's final days comes from a decrypted British cable from April 1945. It records his message about a high-value informant, a former Wehrmacht logistics officer with detailed knowledge of supply depots across the Eastern Alps. Pili wrote that the informant was willing to defect but needed immediate extraction due to SS suspicion. This defector may have held intelligence valuable not only to Britain but also to the Soviets, who were rapidly advancing into Austria. The stakes had escalated. Pili arranged a meeting near the border village of Bleiburg, a region already filling with retreating German units and fleeing civilians. The reveal, the moment where the trail fractures, occurs on the night of April 28, 1945. Pili departed with a small convoy, 2 civilian trucks, 1 jeep, and local guides. Their objective was to reach a forest clearing where a British reconnaissance patrol was expected to arrive by dawn. The last confirmed sighting comes from a resistance courier who traveled with them for several miles. He later stated that the group encountered a German checkpoint manned by a mixture of soldiers and local militia, an unpredictable combination known for arbitrary arrests. Pili supposedly spoke calmly with the guards, presented forged documentation, and was allowed to continue. After this checkpoint, nothing is certain. British records show no arrival at the extraction point. Soviet units advancing from the east reported no encounter with British operatives in the area. German logs recovered after the war list no arrest of a British officer matching Pili's description. The convoy simply vanished. The application of modern analysis complicates the mystery further. In the 1970s, a former Austrian partisan claimed that he saw abandoned vehicles near the Drava River days after Pili's disappearance, though he could not confirm whether they belonged to the convoy. In the late 1990s, a declassified MI6 memo suggested the possibility of a Soviet interception, an assertion based on fragmentary hearsay rather than documented evidence. Another theory posits that the convoy was ambushed by a rogue SS group operating independently as Nazi authority crumbled. Yet these explanations lack the supporting detail needed to reach a definitive conclusion. The deeper mystery lies in the nature of Pili's final mission. Some wartime files remain redacted, hinting that the defector he sought to extract may have carried intelligence of extraordinary value, material sensitive enough to justify continued secrecy even decades later. If so, his disappearance may have involved more than a simple ambush or misfortune. It may have been the result of overlapping intelligence operations conducted in the chaos of collapsing empires. As the war ended days later, Pili's name was quietly moved to the MI6 roll of missing personnel. Families of rescued informants remembered him as the officer who came when no one else would. Yet the absence of answers, no body, no logs, no confirmed witness, ensured that his case remained an unsolved wartime enigma. And so, the stories of these 5 British agents form a single haunting thread through the labyrinth of World War II. Men and women who fought in silence, operated in darkness, and vanished into the fog of war. Their files remain incomplete, their final moments obscured, leaving behind enduring questions that no archive has fully resolved.